everybody. I'm Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. The aim of this podcast is to raise awareness about blindness, visual impairment, and disability in general, in a happy and light-hearted way. For those of you that don't know, I am blind. I was born with a condition called bilateral anophthalmia. Try spelling that one. It basically means that when I was born, my eyes didn't develop properly, so I wear prosthetics instead. The goal of this podcast is to remove some of the stigma and stereotypes around disabilities, whilst also having fun at the same time. Each week, I will be interviewing people from all walks of life, including some with hidden or physical disabilities like mine, and getting to know a little bit more about them and the lives they lead. This week, I am very excited to tell you that I will be talking to comedian, podcaster, author, and ambassador for the Scope charity, Richard Herring. My name is Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. Hi Richard, how are you?
I'm extremely good. How are you?
I'm really good, thank you. Well, first
Good.
of all, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's such an honour to have you. But second of all, how is your day going so far?
Well, it is an honor for you to have me. Thank you for recognizing that. It's the day's going fine. I'm on tour at the moment, so I've just mainly been in the car being driven back from Monmouth, where I was last night. Then I got home and I got a bin lorry arrived delivering me some new bins, and they gave me 3 new bins instead of 1 new bin. So when you're my age, getting a new bin that you weren't expecting to get, they've replaced the old ones. It's fantastic. So I'm having the time of my life.
Oh, well, that's good then. Obviously, yeah, you've just mentioned that you're on tour. How is that going?
It's really good. It's the first stand-up tour I've done for 6 years. I've been touring my podcast in the meantime, and obviously there was COVID, I think you may remember, happening.
Yeah.
So that took us off the road for a little while as well. So yeah, it's really lovely to get back to stand-up, and the shows are going really well. I'm really enjoying it. Usually by this stage in a tour, I'm losing the will to live, but it's so far so good, and it's all going pretty well.
That's good then. What would you say you enjoy about touring?
Oh, I mean, it is a weird thing. There's lots of things that aren't enjoyable. I don't enjoy being away from my family.
Mhm.
Which is quite a new thing. Obviously, most of my tours I didn't have a family, but the last couple I've had kids at home, so that's a bit sad. But it's sort of also nice to be able to sleep in, so that's a good thing. But the shows are what the day is all about, really. So there's a lot of mooching about, and then you get to do the shows and meet the audience, and so it's just great that the show's resonating, I think, with people. It's about me having had cancer, a little brush with cancer, and I'm getting after the show, I'm getting a lot of people telling me how it resonates with their own experience, which I think is the nicest thing that I can get to that it feels authentic and a good description of what it's like going through that horrible thing. But yeah, so that's lovely. But it's people are laughing, and that's the main thing. So that's the most enjoyable thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So to begin with then, could you tell me a little bit about your journey into becoming a comedian?
Yeah, well, I always was interested in being funny and writing. Even when I was very little, I kind of loved funny people. As a teenager, I got into Monty Python a bit later, just listened to the records of that, which was this sketch show from the 1960s and 70s. And then there was a show called The Young Ones came on TV, which really heavily influenced me. And Rick Mayall was sort of my hero. And I sort of really wanted to be a comedian or a writer or an actor. But I just grew up in the countryside and I had no family in that job. And when I went to the careers advisor, he said I had to work in a bank, which was ridiculous because I'd have been a teacher if I hadn't been a comedian, as all my family are. But so it wasn't really a route. So I kind of went to university hoping to get involved with comedy and drama there, and luckily it all sort of fell into place. I met Stuart Lee very early on, and we started working together. I did lots of plays. We did loads. We were writing sketches, new sketches every couple of weeks, and went to Edinburgh. And so, like, by the end of university, it felt like we should give it a crack in the real world. So we sort of started writing for the radio and doing stand-up in about 1989, 1990. So it's a long old journey. It's been a long time I've been doing this, but that was the sort of way in, and it was just, I sort of followed my dream and never really expecting it to come off, and I'm still sort of surprised it has, that I've managed to make a living from for so long. But yeah, that was sort of the way in. It was just loving comedy, and I think that's why my stuff works. Is I'm a comedy fan, and I do most of my things for the love of doing them, and some of them are become successful, and some of them are a bit more niche. But I think the people who like my stuff sort of recognize that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, yeah, like you said about how you enjoy comedy so much. And that how that comes across. I think that's so important. I think that if you enjoy the thing that you're doing, whether that's a career or a hobby, and you're passionate about it, I think that comes across in the products that you produce from that as well.
Yeah, I think so. And it'll be a crazy job to do if you if you weren't enjoying it. Though
Yeah.
I think some people would, some people become depressed and find comedy. It's a difficult job, and you've got to be able to cope with the ups and downs. And you might be successful at one point, and there's no sort of guarantee in any creative art that the next year you'll still be popular. You could be so incredibly popular one year, and then the next year people will just lose interest in you. So you've got to be able to cope with that. You've got to be able to cope with whatever level you're at. I've been fortunate that I've always worked. I create a lot of my own work, which is why I can carry on working. And so, like, I've been able to just work where even when even if people weren't offering me work, I've just been carrying on making my own stuff, and some of that's become successful enough that I don't need anyone else to give me jobs now, though they do occasionally, which is very nice. So yeah, so I think it is that it's a tricky thing to navigate. So I think some people will either become tired of fame or become upset that they're not more famous, and that's the thing you sort of really have to fight against. I think you can only if you're competing against anyone, it's only against yourself, really, to try and be better each time, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned a little bit earlier that especially when you were in university, you were, writing sketches and stuff like that almost every week. So
Yeah.
when you think about sort of the writing process, whether that's writing stand-up shows or sketches, what's your kind of like process with that, and how difficult do you find it?
Well, it's sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's difficult. I find writing as I'm getting older a lot more difficult. It's much more difficult to sit down and get on with it. I think when I was younger, I had loads of ideas fizzing around, and I was really, I mean, it's sort of ambitious to do well rather than, I wasn't like ambitious in a negative sense, but I wanted to get stuff out. So it was sort of, ideas were pouring out of us for a long time, and it was sort of fairly easy, but it's a grueling thing. And especially as you start to write longer pieces or things that are like a book. I have been in places where, weeks and months have passed and I've got nowhere with the project. And so sometimes you're just very excited about something. Sometimes the ideas are pouring out of you, and sometimes you have to sort of staple yourself to the chair in order to force yourself to get the thing done, which usually is a deadline. I usually haven't let deadlines go past, but there's a horrible final week, which if you're writing essays or anything like that at school or university, you'll be aware of, where you're just doing everything at the last possible minute. But yeah, I'm finding it's a very demanding thing being a writer, I think, and so it's a difficult thing to do unless you really want to do it. So like I say, at the moment, I'm usually probably for the last year and a half, aside from writing this stand-up show, which I didn't really sit down and write. I just sort of get up on stage and work it out on stage. I haven't really done much writing since my last book, which was the same as the stand-up show. So, it varies, and I hope it'll come back, and I'll get the bug for writing something again. But maybe it's a young man's game, young person's game.
Yeah, and I would imagine that you've definitely got to be in the right mindset to write, and you've definitely got to be quite motivated.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. But even if you're motivated, sometimes it just doesn't come. And sometimes, I started writing a blog 23 or 24 years ago, partly because I felt like I wasn't getting stuff done, and I kind of thought if I write something every day, then at least I've got something for the day, and maybe it'll inspire me to write other stuff. I called it warming up because that was the idea, but often it's the only thing I do in a day, and then I feel, oh, I've done that, that's fine, I've done something now. So, but I've managed, I'm quite an obsessive person, and when I get my teeth into something, it's hard to let go. And a lot of my work is about obsession and how that can drive you like over the edge a little bit. I'm kind of fascinated by mental health and sanity and insanity and where the line is. But I've literally written a blog for every single day for 23 years or something like that. So, that sort of shows my obsessive nature, and once you've done that, it's difficult to stop. So even though, yeah, I feel like I'm not writing, I am writing like 1,000 words every day for that.
Yeah, you definitely are. That's definitely productive. Um, well, let's talk a bit about that blog then. So obviously you've already mentioned it's called Warming Up, but what would you say you enjoy about writing a blog?
Well, again, sometimes it is enjoyable, and sometimes it's a real pain in the behind because there's times when I write it the day after, so it's the one I wrote today would be for yesterday, and you're looking through, really trying to think of something funny that happened to you on the day. It's not really a diary usually, though sometimes it becomes that. I just thought, there must be something funny every day. I'd actually read a book about I'd read Douglas Adams' collection called The Salmon of Doubt, and just thought this guy died really young, and he had so many ideas, and so many of them didn't get fully formed, or he had big problems with writer's block. And so I kind of thought I want to try and capture all those ideas in some form. But like increasingly, again, as I get older, less happens to I'm usually at home looking after the kids, taking them to school, doing some work. So it's less stuff's happened to me than it was when I was a relatively young man when I started it. But yeah, but it's also interesting because you'll often take ages to think of something, and then suddenly you go, oh, that. So like very early on, I couldn't think of anything. I was a bit hungover, I think, and I couldn't think of anything to write about. And then after about 2 hours, I suddenly remembered this woman at the supermarket. I'd bought 9 yogurts, and the cashier had said, "Oh, someone likes yogurt." And then I wrote a blog defending myself about the fact that I just bought enough yogurt to see me through the next few days. That I didn't particularly like it. And the blog became more and more obvious that I had some sort of problem with yogurt. And that became that became like an hour-long routine at sometimes, but that became a big routine that I would do. So suddenly if you're writing one funny thing a month, or had one good idea a month from that, that was enough to easily do a stand-up show every year. So it was a great resource. And then I started writing newspaper columns, and obviously I had all these not finished pieces of work, but bits of work that I could turn into newspaper columns, and ideas that I could turn into newspaper columns. And you're making yourself think and observe. And I think as a writer, even if you don't publish it, but I think by putting it online, it means that I carry on doing it, which I might not have done if I was just doing it for myself. But if you just keep observing and keep trying to think of stuff that's interesting or funny, and then also I think the thing with a blog is to give yourself the permission to fail. It's not always going to be great. You're churning out a lot of stuff. Stuff isn't happening to you, and I quite like just launching into it and seeing where it leads me. And often those ones, when I've got nothing, suddenly a turn of phrase or an idea will suddenly present itself to me, and I'll create something. Sometimes it'll just be quite a dull thing about something that happened to me in my day. Tomorrow, I'm going to write about a man giving me 2 more bins than I was expecting. So, you can imagine how much fun that sounds like. That could be a terrible blog, but it could be an amazing blog. So, so that's the thing. I think through it, I just found lots and lots of stuff that I wouldn't have turned into comedy. And when I came to write a couple of books that are autobiographical, which I did a book about turning 40, which is called How Not to Grow Up. And again, a lot of the stuff in that book wasn't in my blog because it was intensely personal, but that blog allowed me to remember where I was and what I was doing through the time I was writing that. And then when I came to write Can I Have My Ball Back about my cancer journey, a lot of the time I wasn't writing about the very personal stuff in the blog, but I was able to go, oh, that happened then and that happened then. And so it was incredibly, I would just say to any writer, it's an incredibly useful thing to have, even if you're not going to write autobiography, but just for your ideas to be collected, to think about them, to have something that might go, oh, that might be something in the future. But equally, when it came to writing How Not to Grow Up, I was able to but copy and paste big chunks and then work on them, and it was a lifesaver really, because I just don't think I would have. And with the cancer book, I don't think I'd have remembered the order or the exact things I was going through. And so and in the stand-up show, the little things that color it are the details of the stuff that I was doing to try. I was trying to create memories for my kids, and I might have forgotten about building a snowman or going flying a kite with my daughter. And so those little things it really helped with. So it's been an amazing thing, and obviously most people. I think there's one guy in the world who claims to have done a longer running daily blog than I have by about 10 months. I don't know if he's still going. But yeah, it's the sort of thing that most people wouldn't do. But I would really recommend, if people are interested in being a writer or a comedian, I think it's a really great exercise. You don't have to be quite as obsessive about it as I may be.
Well, yeah, it definitely sounds like an incredible exercise. And like you say as well, like it's if when you look back at that, even now from the entries you wrote years ago or in years to come from the things you're writing, say this year, it can probably almost re-spark and rekindle like little memories that you might have forgotten about and they're
Yeah.
just like slipped to the back of your mind, but you've wrote a 1,000 word blog about it.
Yeah, well, I tell you, when you're my age, on at three, and when you've got two young kids, you forget pretty much everything that's happened to you. So I can go back and read things, certainly in the last 10 years, but even so, of course, you don't remember. It's because it's often about minutia, and it's not about necessarily the big event of the day. And so, yeah, you absolutely can read it back and go, I have no memory of that at all. You can read it back and laugh at something that you've completely forgotten. So it's a lovely memory thing just to say, oh, this is something that happened in my life that I've absolutely completely forgotten about. So yeah, so that it's a very nice personal thing. I forget that it's online and I forget that people read it. I don't even know how many people read it. I never try to find out how many people are reading it. I think if you're interested in comedy, it's a nice little glimpse into the life of a comedian. But I'm not expecting anyone to really read all of it. It's millions and millions. Someone occasionally emails me and tells me how many words I'm up to, but it's a lot. I think it might be a million a year. I can't remember now, but it's a lot. It's a lot of words.
Yeah, absolutely. Now I know that you were diagnosed with testicular cancer in 2021.
Yes.
Would you mind telling me a bit about that experience?
I wouldn't mind at all. I mean, it's great. It's a great thing to be able to talk about it, obviously, and spread the word about it, because it's testicular cancer is, a cancer is always a scary word. And before this happened to me, I'd have thought, oh, cancer, that's pretty much game over. But of course, that's not true. Testicular cancer is actually a very, very treatable cancer. Luckily, it's quite a rare one. But yes, it sort of all happened during lockdown, and it's a disease that usually hits younger people, I have to say, which is very tragic. You usually will lose a ball if you get testicular cancer, but that hopefully will sort you out if it's caught quickly enough. So I kind of noticed there was sort of a heaviness in my testicle, and it seemed bigger. I mean, I don't know how I was even in questioning it, because it was really big in the end. So I don't, it's sort of 6 centimeters by 4 centimeters, which is a lot bigger than my testicle was. So I don't know how I was. I wasn't really sure anything was going on, and I sort of didn't want to bother the NHS at this time they were quite busy with COVID. But eventually I kind of thought I've got to go to the GP. And the GP didn't think it was cancer. He thought it was epididymitis, but he sent me in for a scan anyway. But the scan revealed this large object, or this large anomaly in my scrotum. So over the next month, I sort of was thinking, this is it. They couldn't diagnose what it was, but they decided it had to come out. So it wasn't until it was out that they were able to say it was cancer. So it's not a bad thing to. I didn't realize it was so survivable as all this was happening. A man a week dies of in the UK dies of testicular cancer, so it's not like nothing. So it's comparative to a lot of other cancers, which have a poorer survival rate. 99% is pretty insane that many people survive it. Because testicles are outside your body, it's the one time as a man you'll be glad of that. But yeah, so it was a very profound thing, and getting the phone call from the doctor where he said, there is something there. We don't know what it is. And hearing my kids laughing in the next room. My kids are young. I had kids very late, so my son was only 2 at the time. And so you just envisage them growing up without a dad. You envisage, it becomes, I mean, you start off thinking about your family, but you becomes quite self-indulgent. Then you're angry that your kids won't remember you and your wife will move on to someone else. But it was it was a very profound experience. It was very profound to experience this and a very positive experience. And so this is what the book and the show I've written are really about. It's about the kind of, although I've lost a testicle, which is not nothing. I think the positives far outweigh that negative. It made me want to look after myself more. It made me, I don't want to die, really, I realized quite yet, but it also made me realize that I am definitely going to die. Even though I've thought about that my whole life, I don't think I really understood it until I kind of was faced with it. And then, I can spread the word about this disease. I try and encourage men who are bad at going to the GP, as I was, and who don't like talking about this subject, which I do like talking about. I've talked about this. I mean, it's sort of crazy that it's happened to me because this is sort of the stuff I've been talking about for the last 25 years, really. Um, and I've just done a book called The Problem with Men, which was all about men trying to celebrate Movember. I literally just did Movember 2 or 3 months before I found out I had testicular cancer. So it's something I've been very interested in. It feels like fate has given it to me as a bit of as a joke of some kind or playing around with me. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a very positive thing. And so, as unpleasant as cancer is, it's still lots of funny things happened. So it makes for a very, very funny show, a very funny book. Testicles are quite funny as well. So, that helps. But yeah, it was a big thing. It was and to happen during COVID obviously was a bit more scary as well. But the NHS were amazing given everything else they were going through, and so far so good. And I'm 3 years, 3.5 years cancer free, and so it's looking good that won't be the thing that kills me, though. I've realised something will kill me one day, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I would imagine that, your diagnosis journey and the recovery, I can imagine that that would have been a bit of an emotional roller coaster for you. I can imagine that you were feeling lots of different emotions during that time. Is that something that I'd be right to assume?
Yes, you are very right to assume that. And and as a comedian, it's sort of different than everyone for everyone else. Because as well as being scared and thinking, oh no, there was a big part of me thinking, oh great, I can do some comedy about this. This will make a great book and a great show. When comedians, when I told all my friends, stand-up friends about it, they were going, you lucky git, how did you wangle this? There are a few comedians, and there's a few people who've done shows about this before. It hits about 1 in 270 men, I think. So, there are more comedians than that. So obviously, it's the kind of thing that as a comedian, you're not exactly hoping something bad will happen to you, but if you have something that's unusual, that's a different perspective, I mean, I'm sure you'll know this as well. That if something different in your life, there's humor in that, and there's interesting in that, and it gives you a different story than someone else would have. And in the comedy world, that's not a bad thing. In the comedy world, there's a lot of white middle-aged men vying to tell jokes about the same sort of thing. If you've got your own experience and your own outlook, then that's not a bad thing. So that's a weird part of it. But it was scary, and it was lovely that my first thought was for my family, not unsurprisingly, but it's just made me realize not what's important because I knew what was important, but it's made me realize what's not important in life. And so not only do I think I'll live longer as a result of this because I'm looking after myself a bit better, and also you get checked up all the time, but also, I think it's uh yeah, I think I'm living a healthier lifestyle. So I think, in a sense, it's nearly all been fantastic for me. And by talking about it, other people have found out that I've realized they've had cancer. So I've sort of, I'm not saying I'm the new Jesus, but I've saved people's lives as a result of this. Though I feel I should be able to, all the ones I've saved, I feel I should be able to wear their excised testicles as a necklace, and that should be my prize. Walk around so people know how many lives I've saved. Obviously, they probably would have been survived anyway, but it's nice that it's helped people.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine. I can imagine that the fact you've been able to help people in that way, I can imagine that that would be a really nice feeling.
Yeah, it is, so it's crazy. I mean, it's crazy when comedy does something positive, but I experienced that through most of my comedy is me doing silly jokes about stupid and jokes about myself. And especially with the podcast, actually, people will email me say, look, I was in a really dark place and going through a really difficult time. And I listened to your podcast and it helped me get through that thing. Or, I went to see your show and that helped me through a very difficult time. And you're never expecting that, as a comedian. So it's an amazing thing to think that what you're just doing as as a largely stupid exercise to try and make people laugh can actually help people through very, very dark times in their life. So, that's lovely. I do it mainly for myself. And and I love making people laugh, and I get a lot out of it. But so yeah, anything like that, anything that's a bonus, anytime when you end up helping people, accidentally raising money for charity or whatever, is a lovely bonus.
Yep, I can definitely imagine. So you are an ambassador for the Scope charity and Movember. How did you become involved with these charities, and what would you like to be able to achieve with the roles?
Well, with Movember, I just simply got testicular cancer, and then they asked me to be involved. So that was, I mean, that was a bit of a no-brainer for a one-baller that I should. Well, there's a lot of charities about that subject, so I got asked by a lot of charities to support them, and I decided to choose Movember, partly because I'd already done Movember, and partly because I think it's sort of tuned into all the stuff I was doing because I've been trying to promote men away from complaining about International Women's Day and then supporting International Men's Day and International Men's Month, in fact, November, that they pretend doesn't exist. So that was obvious. With Scope, it was sort of just it was really just an accidental thing. It was like 2004, and I was going through a bit of a depressed time, and I started doing lots of stunts and things. There became a show actually called the 12 Tasks for Hercules Terrace, but I was sort of a bit lost, and I decided to run the marathon, hoping it would kill me a little bit. Then a little bit of sort of hoping it was sort of suicide, so a suicidal thing to do. But my friend was running it and said, "Oh, I'm doing it for Scope." So I ran, and they can get you a place if you do it for Scope. So I went, "Fine, I'll do it." So it wasn't. I had no affiliation really with Scope. I had a friend called Francesca Martinez who's got cerebral palsy, and one of my friend's daughters had a little bit of cerebral palsy, but it wasn't really anything to do with that. And so by running it for them, and then I started doing these programs with my shows, and I did a show called Talking Cock, which ironically now I'm doing one about balls, which was about a male version of the vagina monologues and trying to encourage men to talk about the issues that they generally just joke about. And so I wanted to do a program to raise money for charity, and I approached a cancer charity, and they rejected me because they thought the show sounded like something they didn't want to be associated with. And so I then said to Scope, "Would you like me to collect money for you with these programs?" And they said yes, which seemed again like the obvious thing to do. And so I just started doing these programs every year for Scope. And that started raising, and at that time, people had cash in their pockets, and we'd raise a lot of money just by doing collections, gave out free programs. And then bit by bit, I sort of just gradually became more involved in the charity, and it's a charity I'm really glad to support because I think I don't have any skin in the game. It's not because I'm disabled. It's not because anyone in my family is disabled. It's because I realized through going to the schools and meeting people who work for the charity how disabled people are. People try to pretend they don't exist or are embarrassed about thinking about it. People are very happy to give money to animal charities and less happy to give money to charities helping people. Plus, most people will become disabled at some point in their life. One of the great moments of doing this was talking to someone at a party who was disabled and saying, "Well, look, if you're disabled, what do you call someone who isn't disabled? Because non-disabled obviously is a double negative. It doesn't sound right. Able doesn't sound right." And she said, "We call you the not yet disabled." And I just thought that's, what a fantastic point to make, because people don't want to think about that. They don't want to think about the fact that as they're either going to die or they're going to lose abilities, right? They are probably going to, as they get older, not be able to walk, certainly not be able to walk in the same way they used to, possibly end up in a wheelchair, probably end up losing body parts, as I eventually have. And so, the fact that we're not interested in helping that as some of the other bigger charities, like some of the cancer charities as well, that people will support more readily. I thought was interesting, and so I really did get behind this as a big thing. And I didn't, I don't want to. I get asked to be involved in a lot of charities, and I really try to limit it because I think it's so important to support the charities you support wholeheartedly. So it's ended up being Scope. I've done a lot for Scope over the years. Movember, obviously, because of my experience, and then a Refuge I started doing just because of this International Women's Day thing on Twitter, where I would tell men when International Men's Day was when they asked, and I'd spend all day doing that. I realized I could make money from that, and it seemed good to take the money from that and give it from men's being stupid and asking a question that had an answer, thinking it didn't have an answer. It seemed very positive to use that to raise money for a charity that largely helps women. It does help men as well, and boys. But to turn men's stupidity into something that was positive for victims of real male unpleasantness. But yeah, so it's nice to be able to do stuff um, uh, for other people through this job. But again, I think it feels almost like a byproduct of what I do rather than rather than me thinking I must be a great guy and help people. But I think especially with Scope, the work I've done with Scope, I've found very moving and illuminating. And again, I just think what the thing when you help other people and do and talk about these subjects, you end up helping yourself. So by talking about testicular cancer, I got way more back from people saying, "Hey, I had this 30 years ago. You're going to be fine." I got way more out of it than I gave, I think. And I think similarly with Scope, it helped me through that year when I was 40 and everything was falling apart for me a bit, going to the school, seeing these kids doing their Christmas play, just made me think, what the hell am I complaining about in my life, and it was just sort of such a joyous expression of their lives, and that had a very profound effect on me as well, and sort of made me less self-involved and happier. So, I think nearly always when people are selfish and when people are only thinking about themselves, they actually do themselves a disservice. And actually, when we help each other, we not only get more out of it, but things become less expensive if we work together. It's why I can't really understand that mindset you know, of not wanting to contribute to tax and not wanting to contribute to charity and not wanting to help people, because the more that we do those things, the less we have to spend on things ourselves, and the less dangers there are in the world, and the safer everything is for everyone. So, it's. I feel very fortunate to have been involved in all this stuff, but as I say, I've got more out of it than I've given.
Yeah,
That
I
was
guess.
that was a very long answer. Sorry.
Oh no, don't worry about it. That's completely fine. We love that. Um, yeah, no, I think I totally agree with you. I think that point you made there about helping each other also helps yourself. I really like that point because it's almost like teamwork, isn't it? If we all sort of work together and everyone sort of pitches in and does what they can, like you say, it can help everyone involved.
Yeah. Well, I'm the same. So look, one in two people are going to get cancer. So like that's something that people should be going. That's a 50-50 shot. Do you want to go, well, I'll take the chance that it's not going to be me and not do anything about it? Or do you want to put a little bit in and maybe help yourself in the future? And similarly with disability, you can sit back and go, well, I'm fine now, but you won't be fine. Something's going to happen to you. And also at any point, any of us can be in an accident and lose our sight, lose our ability to move, be seriously injured. So even if you're the most selfish person in the world and only care about yourself, it seems to me like, well, let's make sure that all those things are covered in case it happens to me. That's what I don't with the NHS. I don't understand. Even people who've got private medicine, if you have an accident, there's no private accident and emergency. If you have an accident, you go to the same accident emergency as everyone else. I've taken my son there 3 times in the last 5 years, not for anything major, but we've had to wait for 6, 7 hours with a tiny child. And if you're private, you still have to do that. So we need to make sure that all these things are funded properly for ourselves, not for. But I like some people just don't like the idea that they might get they might give money to someone who doesn't deserve it. So they would rather spend more money and do it themselves than put some money into a pot that we all benefit from. it's sort of so short-sighted, and I think especially in the world we live in now, where things there could be massive upheavals. Any of us could be, you know, you could lose your homes. You just have to look around the world. You could lose your lives. You could lose you could lose the use of your bodies. You need to be thinking about that, and I don't personally do these things because I'm thinking of myself. It's fine to do things to think of other people. But what I'm saying is, you do, yeah, you absolutely will benefit from it as well. Even if you just benefit from feeling like, oh, I did quite a nice thing, and oh, what's this feeling in my heart? Oh, I don't feel like I'm such a horrible person anymore. And we're all horrible people. We can all be selfish, and we all do bad things, and we all mess things up. So, I think the more you can do that's nice and helpful, the better you'll feel about yourself as well.
Yeah, 100%. And obviously, that point you made there about that most people, if not everyone, will experience disability at some point. I think that's a really important point, and one that I definitely picked up on there because,
Yeah,
like you say, not everyone's born with a disability, but the chances are that most people will experience some sort of disability in their life. And even if they don't personally, chances are that one of their loved ones will, whether that's a relative or a friend or someone that they're in a relationship with or someone else. Chances are that if they don't experience disability, they will know someone who does. And so there is a very low chance that they won't experience disability in some capacity during their lifetime.
absolutely. And really, you're only going to not experience disability if you die at the peak of your fitness. So that's not a great alternative. You're going to decline. I think even things like, I think with wheelchair access, you kind of think, well, anyone who has a baby in a pram needs to be able to get around and be able to get access to places with wheels. So even if you just thought of that, anyone who's absolutely no disabilities but has a child, you're going to have a couple of years where you really need to be able to get around and be mobile with somebody on wheels. So that's a good reason to support that as well. If you need if people are looking for reasons, then I guess there might be a bit beyond help. But yeah, there's so many advantages to it all. Plus, disabled people are people and are valuable members of society, and we should, everyone has stuff to contribute. So I just that attitude. And look, I guess I when I was younger, I didn't think about it, and maybe when I was at school, we were all very horrible about disabled people, in the 1970s and 1980s. So I get the impetus behind that nastiness, and I think if you're young, then maybe that's acceptable. But it's I think it's the way that disabled people are. No, it's like with any of these things where a minority group is either victimized or demonized. If you actually were to go and meet any person, you would just find these are regular people who have a different sexuality or a different way of looking at the world, or different abilities, or from a different country, and so I hate that kind of othernessing, that othering of human beings, and I think again, like I say, I've had so much more out of what I've done, and I sort of joke about my charity work, but I don't think I don't think I've done all that much really, and often it's encouraging other people to contribute in any case. But I personally, I would say I've gained so much more from doing it, and from meeting the people that these causes have affected. Again, with Refuge, to go in and see the work that Refuge does. Um, it's astonishingly sad and awful, but to think by me doing a stupid thing one day a year for 10 years raised hundreds of thousands of pounds for that. It's just mind blowing, and I can't really take much credit for it, but it's because it's sort of insane. But that's a lovely byproduct of me dicking around online, and suddenly something nice like that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure that you've done a lot more for these charities than you realize. Now, obviously, you've mentioned you've written quite a few books. So would you mind telling me about some of them?
Well, yeah, I've written a few books. I wrote an annual with Stuart Lee about the TV show we did called Fist of Fun, where we put a lot of work into it. Because as a kid, I was annoyed when my favorite comedians put out a kind of cash-in book, and it was just the pictures of them in silly hats. So that was our first book, and my first book. And then yeah, I did a book based on my show Talking Cock. So I did a lot of research about male genitalia and the history of all that, and I did a big survey for that show and that book. So I kind of had a lot of information then. That came out about 25 years ago, 23 years ago. When I was 40, I did a book called How Not to Grow Up, which was again just about the pretty seedy and unpleasant life I was leading as a sort of man child as I approached 40, and then sort of realizing it was time to grow up a bit, but meeting my wife and how that turned my life around. So again, it's a funny book, but it's a book about excess, and then how that's not necessarily good for you. And I've done lots of, I've done a book about also called Can I Have My Ball Back? And then I've done a book called The Problem with Men, which is about the Women's Day, International Men's Day thing, but toxic masculinity. And then there's quite a lot of other books that are sort of based on podcasts, which are like emergency questions book. I do things in my podcast where I ask weird questions to get conversations going. And those have weirdly been pretty successful. So I've done a few of those. I've done some we've self-published, and I've done a couple of self-published collections of the blog. And then, yeah, I've done a book called 1001 Emergency Questions, and a book called Would You Rather, which are just stupid questions you can ask each other, but they generally, weirdly, they do work really well in if you're trying to get a conversation going with a date or with some friends, or if you're in a perilous situation. Someone emailed me to tell me they'd been stuck up the Himalayas, I think it was, during an avalanche, and they'd been in a like a cabin or whatever, but they'd all been stuck for a week. It might have been the Himalayas, but it was somewhere like that. And they just asked each other's emergency questions. Some of them are rude, but things like, would you rather have a hand made out of ham or an armpit that dispenses sun cream? Just sort of stupid questions, and then sort of boring questions that can often be interesting. I just found in the podcast, if you ask people stuff they haven't been asked before, especially with comedians, you end up getting really great new stories rather than them just telling the same stories they've told on other chat shows or in their acts. So I think like by chucking in just a weird question like, have you tried sushi? Which is obviously a sort of dumb question for most people, because most people will have, but there might be a story in it. Um, or have you ever seen a Bigfoot, which clearly no one really will have, but amazingly leads to some interesting stories. Have you ever seen a ghost? Again, you find out a lot of people from something like that, but then there's sort of weirder questions as well. So yeah, so I've done quite a few collections of those, but yeah, so I guess it's 10 or 12 books overall that I've published one way or the other, which seems crazy. I think like when I wrote Talking Cock, I thought, well, there, I've written a book. That's an amazing achievement. So it's kind of great to have done more. But I would like to try and write more, and I'd like to try and write some fiction maybe. And but autobiographies. I found the cancer book very easy to write, I have to say, partly because it was fresh in my mind, and partly because loads of stuff happened, and partly because I had the blog. But just I think I really needed to write that book again for myself. And it was quite whilst the year I had cancer, I kind of got through it by joking, and I'm being positive and seeing the positive sides of what I was going through. I think writing that book was quite a traumatic experience as I kind of worked out what had actually happened to me. I think, you're not exactly in denial, but you're trying to do the best you can and not scare your kids, and keep going. And I did throw myself into that year, as you'll see if you see the show or read the book. But the writing the book, it was reliving it all was a bit like, okay. So I kind of found the year after, a little bit more challenging than the year it actually happened. But it's again such a wonderful thing to be able to process what you've been through writing, which you can do without having to publish a book. And that's why I love the blog, is anyone can do that. You can write a diary, you can just write your feelings down in a notepad, You can write online and not publish, write on your computer and not publish, or you can put it online. You can put it online anonymously. You can do whatever you want. But I think just I feel very privileged to have this job where I can work through my own issues via either a stand-up show or a book or whatever. It is a lot of the shows have been therapy for me that I think hopefully will resonate for other people. But yeah, that's I suppose the latest book was the one that um, meant the most to me. But was also really, absolutely the easiest book I've ever written. I wrote it in about 3 months.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, I can imagine that that would be quite an easy book to write. Now, like you've also mentioned, you also have a podcast called the Richard Herring Leicester Square Theatre Podcast. What made you want to start a podcast, and what do you enjoy about podcasting?
Well, as I've been podcasting for approaching 17 years because I did a podcast with the journalist Andrew Collins, who I'd done some radio work with, and we'd gone on really well, and then his show had been taken off. And we just sort of the initial impetus to it was just like, oh, it's quite easy to do this. No one's really doing it. If we do a weekly show where we just chat and mess around, maybe we'll get the radio show back or whatever, but it'll just be a bit of fun. And what I liked about it initially, just the medium, it came at a point where the BBC had been through some problems with Jonathan Ross and Russell Brand, who seems like quite a problematic individual, and so there was a lot of censorship going on. So I just liked the fact, and also I was having lots of ideas but struggling to get them made. Like even if it was TV, I'd get pilot scripts and I'd write them, and then nothing would happen, or I might get shoot one of them but not get it on. If it was radio, I might get it on, but it might take years. And so just the immediacy of having an idea and being able to do it, but also just the autonomy of being in control of everything. So the content we could, because it's online, we could be as rude as we wanted. No one was censoring us. And I also thought, well, this might be a way to get an audience together. All the other comedians told me I was mad because I was giving away loads of work for free. But like I just thought, well, I've got so many ideas and I want to get them out there. And maybe this will lead to something, but that's not really important. And I didn't envisage it becoming what it's become, which is a really easy way. Well, it is the main way I make my living at the moment. So like it's become a business, and it's become quite a lucrative business for me. Not as lucrative as it is for some people, but very much more than I ever thought it would be. But yeah, so I love the autonomy of it, right? So like this is something you control of. It's like stand up. And I could see the possibilities of it. So early on in a sketch show called As It Occurs to Me, which I really enjoyed doing, which was I wrote the day before, and we put it together very fast. And I've sort of done crazy ones where I played myself at snooker and clear stones off fields and talk to puppets and so, all sorts of stuff. But then I started when I stopped working with Andrew Collins, I thought, well, I want to carry on doing something like that, but I'll do it with a different person every week. So that was Richard Herring's Leicester Square Theatre Podcast, or RHLST, it's sometimes called. And yeah, again, it was just like, oh, well, I can do it live, so we could charge people to come and see it, so that might raise a bit of money. But it was more just reaching out to people, and I realized pretty quickly that it was an advert for me, and the thing is now people advertise on it, you realize that even more. If people are paying you to advertise on the podcast, it must be worth some money to them. So it's got to be worth a lot more to me because it's literally an hour long advert for me. But I found my live audiences. I'd been performing, doing stand-up shows, and they were doing okay. I was maybe getting 50 or 100 people coming to see me. And once the podcast started, those modest numbers were increasing, and I think it was a lot to do with the podcast. It probably doubled quite quickly, so it was still like 100 to 200 people coming to see me. But it was that meant my stand-up career was big enough to that was enough to make a living from stand-up. So it didn't matter that I wasn't making money from the podcast. We did get a radio show out of it. Well, it did lead to other work as well, because obviously it is a little advert of yourself. But again, all of that was incidental, really. And to begin with, I just thought, well, I want to do the podcast for the fun of doing them. And I probably for the first 10 years, that was all I did. I didn't really make money from them, only from selling tickets. But they advanced what I was doing, and also I think saved my career, really. I'm not sure. I was doing stand up and I was writing stuff, but I think it was being able to, just the ability to go, I've had a stupid idea. I'm going to see if this will work as a podcast. And my favorite things I do are stone clearing and the puppet show, Twitch of Fun, which are literally hundreds of people watch those, whereas Realistica probably gets, um, gets sort of can get 1 million downloads a month, So Realistica is like a bigger deal. But I love the little things I do, the kind of create the more imaginative, weirder things I do, which I wouldn't don't think would work on in any other medium than podcasting. So like I think it's Twitch of Fun is like I stream it so on Twitch, but it's goes out as a podcast. So I think that autonomy and being ahead of the curve, luckily, on all of this has meant that I am able to make a living from it now in a way I don't think I'd have been able to if I now went, oh, I'm going to do an interview podcast show. I think that would be so boring. Everyone's doing it. I also, by the time people did want to start advertising in it, I'd established that brand so much and what it was that it was a very individual show in any case, and quite different, I think, from the other interview shows. So yeah, it's again a very completely by luck. I'm not a businessman. I haven't planned any of this. But yeah, I've sort of kind of landed in this medium, and it's really suited me, and it sort of worked for me as well. So it's yeah, I'm very fortunate. But it comes from what we talked about at the beginning, which is just wanting to do stuff for the sake of the product, just to say, this isn't doing podcasting wasn't, oh, maybe this will become a TV show. Doing podcasting was, wouldn't it be cool to do a really rude podcast, or wouldn't it be cool to do a really weird podcast? And that was an end in itself. And I think that's if you are a comedian or you are creative, I think you have to believe in what you're doing, and the thing you're doing has to be done for the sake of the thing and for nothing else. There's so much opportunity now for young people to be able, when I started, you wouldn't have been able to make your own radio show. You wouldn't have been able to afford to film yourself. You wouldn't have been able to do like Instagram or TikTok or any of those things, partly because they didn't exist, but partly because you wouldn't have had the technology to do them. So to have that technology and be able to put your stuff out to the world, and when you think the world is 7 billion people, let's say 3 billion, a billion of them have internet access. I don't know what the true figure is, but let's say it's that. And that you've got a potential audience of 3 billion people for whatever you're doing. If you can find 2,000 people around the world who love what you're doing, that's a career. You can find 10,000 people. That's that's a very good career. So I think and I don't think it's been explored. I'm surprised how few people have really explored podcasts and online stuff and seen how far you can take it. Because I think it's such an opportunity to do really interesting things, which I hope I'm doing. But I'm surprised other people haven't taken it even further.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what would you say has been your proudest moment so far?
Um, I don't, I've had a career that's just been sort of level. There's been little peaks. There hasn't been any massive troughs. There haven't been any massive peaks. I think coming back and doing stand up. I didn't like stand up the first time I did it. I felt comfortable working with other people. I'd sort of done sketches at college. I'd done little bits of pieces on my own, but kind of character stuff that didn't really work in stand up clubs. I tried stand up in the early 90s and did not like it. Then sort of pivoted to doing the double act and radio stuff and TV stuff. When I came back to doing one man shows, when the double act stops finished, I started doing one man shows again. I did a show called Christ on a Bike, which was about my relationship with Jesus as an atheist who's obsessed with Jesus. And I was 33, so I was the same age as Jesus when he died. And I did a routine in that show that when I got to it in the show, people would be laughing, their heads would be thrown back, which doesn't happen very often. They'd be laughing, tears in their eyes. And I knew I hadn't even got to the funniest bit of the routine yet. And they were already in pain. I knew that what I was going to get to would make them laugh so much that they would actually be hurting. And it was a wonder. That was like the peak in a way for me, just because it was so symbolic. It was so important having done all this stuff together to realize I could do stuff on my own, but also to create a lot, to consistently create a bit of a show that, and I don't think it's something that's happened a lot in my career or in anyone's career. I don't think you get those routines very often, where you've got a nice long routine that is just building, and making people laugh more and more and more, and you see an audience helpless with laughter. So I think just for what it symbolized in terms of, hey, it's going to be okay, you can work on your own, and hey, you might be able to be a stand-up, but be, probably the biggest laugh of my career. I would say that moment is the bit professionally I look at and think this is the most important thing. But there's lots of other things, and I think being a dad is the thing that I'm most proud of and the thing that I like most in my life. And it took me a long time to get to being that and realizing that as much as I love comedy and as much as I'm obsessed about comedy and worked at comedy, I think being a dad is the role that I like most in my life. And it's great to be able to still, but I still want to be a comedian. I'm still on tour. It's harder being away from the kids, but it's yeah, I'm still doing my job. So I think overall, really, the probable answer is if you can have a career in show business or in writing where you constantly work from the age of sort of 21 to 81 or 101, then I think that's a successful career for me. And that's what I hope will be the case. I kind of hope I'll just keep working till I die, and that people will be interested enough to carry on coming to see me or pay to read my books or whatever. And I've done 35 years or whatever it is. Is it longer than that? Is it 40 years? Oh God. I think it's 35 years. So, that's a good start. So I did another 35. I'm halfway through, let's say. If I'm not taken before my time, as I nearly have been, if I get 30 more years, and I keep on working, and I'm still getting up on stage and doing jokes. Barry Cryer was a big influence to me, and I look at his life and I think that guy worked all through until he died. He was working right up to the end, still doing live stuff, still loving comedy, and that to me that would be my achievement if I made it, would be to do that. So yeah, so that's the moment. But I think hopefully the achievement is to not stop, not stop
Yeah.
until you have to stop because you can't move anymore.
Yeah, definitely. Um, so what would you say then are your aspirations for the future?
I think just that, probably just to keep working and not, I think again, having been through the cancer, having been through the experience of this job, not to worry too much about where you personally are, just to kind of enjoy it, not to really have ambitions, to be on that. I mean, I want to keep working, I want to keep creating good stuff. Lockdown creatively was great for me because I tried lots of different things, did lots more improvised stuff. So I'd love to write a bit, I'd love to hopefully write some kind of fiction. I would love to put together a film, like a low budget film, maybe an improvised film, which I'm hoping we might do next year if we can get some funding together. Um, but I think it really is just to carry on, I think to carry on without just getting complacent and without just getting in a rut. And I think, the Rehearsal is weird because I've been doing it for 12 years or something like that. And it's very unusual when we do one thing, but it's so different every time that it doesn't feel like, oh no, here we go. This is the same. I think it's developed over time, but because it's a different guest every time, it doesn't feel like the same show every time. So I think to not get in a rut and not just coast, but to keep on trying to find stuff that excites me and trying stuff out. Some of it will work and some of it won't. Some of it will work for a small amount of people, which still counts, and some of it will work for bigger amounts of people. So, I'm really interested to see what happened, but like I say, I think I was ambitious when I was younger and I kind of hoped, what I would have hoped to be when I was younger in my wildest dreams is not what I am now. But I'm glad that I'm where I am now rather than where the young me hoped I'd be, because I think I would be unhappy and I might not be alive anymore. And my life would be different in a way that I don't think would have been good for me. And so, I feel really fortunate to have this autonomy I've got. I'm making money from my own projects. I can put that money back into making stuff I really want to make. Um, it'll be nice to if someone else gave me the money to do that, I have to say. But equally, if you provide the money yourself, then no one's telling you no, you can't do that. So, I might accidentally be in the perfect position as a comedian, as a creative person. I'm well off, and I'm not in danger of starving anytime soon. And I'm still able to push things forward and try out new things. So I'm excited about the future, but also equally aware that there is no guarantees that you even will have a future. So, I think that in a very positive way, that's an important thing to realize, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I wish you the best of luck with all your future plans. I'm sure they will all go very well. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast. You're such a wonderful person, and it's been a it's been a real pleasure to get to talk to you. Obviously, I know that you're very busy at the minute. You've got lots and lots going on, so thank you so much for giving up a bit of your time to talk to me. It really does mean the world. Thank you.
It's all right, Evie, and thank you. It was a very, excellent interview, and thank you for listening and understanding, and I wish you the very best in the future as well. I think you're going to have a very exciting future too.
Oh, thank you. And thank you to my audience for listening, and I will see you all next time.